Welcome to The Deep Dive, the show where we take complex ideas and, well, try to make them crystal clear for you.
That's the plan.
Today, we want you to think about something kind of surprising. What if all these big shifts, these conflicts we see, what if they're not actually new? What if they're just, another one of those patterns playing out over centuries?
Yeah, that's exactly the core idea we're digging into. This whole deep dive revolves around the changing world order. It's this study that looks past just listing historical events.
Right.
It digs deeper to find these timeless, sort of universal cause and effect links, the things that really drive the rise and fall of countries, their money, everything.
So our mission today.
Basically give you a shortcut, help you understand these big forces so you can maybe see where we are in these huge cycles and maybe get a sense of what could be coming next.
Okay, let's start with a story from the author himself. It really sets the scene. August 15th, 1971. President Nixon goes on TV, announces the U.S. won't exchange dollars for gold anymore. Just cuts the tie.
A huge deal. Breaking a long-standing promise.
Exactly. So you'd expect chaos, right? Markets tanking.
You'd think so.
But nope. The stock market actually jumped, went up about 4%. The author, he was just 22 then, clerking on the New York Stock Exchange. He was completely floored. Shocked.
Yeah, I mean, a painful surprise, right? It just went against everything people thought they knew. And that experience, plus a few others like it, really pushed him.
Pushed him how?
To dig into history. He started looking back and found, hey, these currency devaluations, they'd caused similar market reactions before, again and again.
So the pattern started emerging.
Exactly. By studying more, he started to see the mechanics behind it all, why these things kept happening.
And that's where his big idea comes from. That most big events, good times, depressions, wars, revolutions, they repeat.
Pretty much. They happen for fundamentally the same reasons, usually in cycles. And often these cycles are longer than one person's lifetime, so we don't always see them clearly.
He calls it the another one of those framework. So It's not just about knowing history, it's about using it to anticipate things, like a predictive tool.
Absolutely. Think of it like a biologist. You see an animal, if you can figure out its species, boom, you instantly know a lot about how it behaves, its characteristics.
Right, you can apply general principles.
Yeah, instead of treating every single encounter as totally unique and starting from scratch. You recognize the type of event, the species, and apply what history teaches us.
Okay, I get that. It's like zooming out from focusing on, one little ant carrying a crumb.
Yeah, exactly. We get so caught up in our own little lives or a little piece of the puzzle.
And instead, you see the whole colony, the whole environment, the bigger patterns. So why is that perspective useful for you listening?
Well, because understanding these broader cycles helps you place things. It helps you see where we might be in the current cycle, what forces are driving things, and what's likely to happen next. It gives you that bigger picture.
So let's decode these patterns. The study talks about this universal sort of template, right? An archetype of rise and decline.
You see it in the big reserve currency empires, the Dutch, the British, the Americans, but also in others, Germany, France, Russia, India, Japan, China.
Wow, it goes way back too. You mentioned Chinese dynasties.
Yeah, back to around 600 AD. The goal is to give us a model, a template, to understand all these cycles, especially the one we're in right now.
Okay, so how do we measure a country's power within this model? The study uses 8 factors, you said, and they're all connected.
That's right. It's not just about having a big army or lots of money.
Yeah, you mentioned education, competitiveness. That feels important.
Yeah.
We often focus on the flashy stuff, the military, the economy.
But those underlying strengths, they're often the real engine, aren't they?
Definitely seems that way. So what are the 8?
Okay, so you've got education, competitiveness, innovation and technology, trade, economic output, military strength, financial center status, and finally, reserve currency status.
That's comprehensive.
It is. And an important point the study makes, being the richest and most powerful isn't always the same as being the best off.
Explain that.
Well, some countries might choose, peace and quality of life over just raw power or accumulating the most wealth. And arguably, those deeper societal strengths, that cohesion, that's what really sustains a nation long term.
That's a really key distinction. Okay, so those are the measures. What about the engines driving these cycles, the big forces shaking things up? The study points to 4 main ones.
Yeah, 4 critical ones. First, the long-term debt cycle. Second, the money and credit cycle, closely related. Third, the wealth gap cycle, the internal dynamic. And fourth, the global geopolitical cycle, how nations interact.
And underlying all of that is how wealth is actually created, right?
Fundamentally, yes.
Yeah.
Throughout history, wealth and power come from building it, taking it from others, or, finding it like discovering oil.
But for long-term rising living standards.
It really boils down to productivity, human productivity,
Yeah.
output per person. And that's driven by learning, building things, inventing new stuff. That's the sustainable path.
Okay, we've touched on these big forces, and money and debt are clearly huge. But let's really get into that. To understand today, we need to know how money and debt function in these cycles. They aren't the same thing, are they? What's the key difference?
Good question. It's crucial. So money is what actually settles a claim. You pay a bill with money, transaction over, done.
Right.
Debt, though, is different. It's a promise to deliver money later. It's an obligation. The key is to watch how much debt and paper money there is compared to, say, hard money like gold, but also compared to the actual amount of goods and services being produced.
Got it. Money is final settlement, debt is a future promise. So what have these money systems looked like over time?
Well, the study outlines 3 basic types that keep reappearing. First, you have hard money. Think gold coins, silver coins.
Physical stuff.
Exactly. It's the most restrictive system because you can't just create more money out of thin air. You need more metal.
Okay, type 1. What's next?
Type 2 is paper money that represents a claim on hard money. Think old paper bills that said redeemable for gold or silver certificate.
Ah, so it's linked.
Right. It makes creating money and credit easier, which can boost the economy.
Right.
But there's a risk, right? What if everyone wants their gold back at once? You get runs on the banks if the claims exceed the actual hard money they hold.
Like we saw with the Dutch later on. And type 3.
That's fiat money. That's mostly what we have today, like the US dollar. It's not backed by anything tangible like gold.
So central banks can just print it.
Essentially, yes, they can manage the supply more freely. The big risk here isn't running out of gold. It's printing too much, creating so much money and debt relative to actual stuff being produced that people lose faith. That leads to devaluation, or in extreme cases, hyperinflation.
Which brings us right back to 1971, Nixon's decision. That wasn't just some technical adjustment, was it?
Not at all. It was a fundamental shift, moving the whole world, essentially, from a Type 2 system, dollars linked to gold, to a Type 3 fiat system.
And the driver was that guns and butter problem, trying to pay for Vietnam and the Great Society programs.
That was a huge part of it. The U.S. was spending and borrowing massively. It created way more dollar claims on its gold than it actually had in Fort Knox.
Yeah.
So when countries started asking for their gold,
The U.S. couldn't deliver, so they just changed the rules. Defaulted on the promise, basically.
pretty much, yeah, a default on the promise to convert dollars to gold.
Wow, a massive moment. Now, you mentioned this allows governments to print money. Why do they do that when they hit a debt crisis? It seems like it would make things worse, but clearly it's tempting. Why?
Now that's where it gets really interesting, because printing money is often seen as the easiest path, politically and economically, in the short term.
Easier than what? Raising taxes or cutting spending?
Exactly. Those are painful and unpopular. Printing money lets the government and other debtors pay back their debts with money that's worth less. It effectively reduces the real burden of the debt.
So it's like a hidden tax.
It really is. It taxes anyone holding cash or bonds because their money loses purchasing power. But it helps the debtors. The downside is people aren't stupid. If they see this happening, they start moving their wealth out of cash and bonds and into other things.
Like what? Gold, stocks, real estate.
Yeah, things they think will hold their value better. Gold, certain kinds of stocks, maybe commodities. And the study points out that this process, creating huge amounts of debt and money, is happening now on a scale we haven't seen since World War II.
Okay, that sets the stage. Let's look at history. How did this play out before?
Starting with the Dutch Empire, they were the top dogs for a long time, right? From about 1625 to 1780.
Yeah, they peaked around 1650, their golden age. They were incredibly wealthy and powerful for a relatively small country.
How did they pull that off?
A few key things. 1, amazing education for the time. 2, incredible inventiveness. They were responsible for maybe a quarter of all major inventions back then. Think shipbuilding, navigation.
Crucial for trade.
Absolutely. And maybe the biggest thing, they arguably invented capitalism as we know it. Whoa, okay, how so?
Well, they created the first publicly listed company, the Dutch East India Company, the VOC. And the first stock exchange in Amsterdam back in 1602. They developed sophisticated lending systems.
And their currency.
The Dutch guilder became the world's first real global reserve currency, widely trusted, widely used. Amsterdam was the financial center of the world. Money flowed there from everywhere.
Incredible rise. But empire's fall, what went wrong for the Dutch?
The classic pattern started. They began losing their edge, their competitiveness. Other countries, especially Britain, started copying their innovations, their methods.
So competition heated up.
Big time. Plus, maintaining their vast empire became super expensive. Their debts started piling up. And then, internal conflicts grew, like the Patriot movement challenging the old guard. Their military also weakened over time.
It sounds like a slow erosion. You mentioned earlier that the Dutch guilder's collapse wasn't just financial, but a real power shift. What were the clearest warning signs there that might echo today?
Well, that loss of competitiveness is a big one. When others start catching up and overtaking you in trade and technology, and the rising cost of empire, leading to unsustainable debt, that's another classic sign.
And the final straw.
The ultimate test was the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War, 1780 to 1784. It wasn't just a military defeat. It triggered a financial meltdown.
The bank run.
Exactly. A massive run on the Bank of Amsterdam. People panicked, tried to swap their paper guilders for gold, but the bank didn't have enough gold to cover all the claims. Confidence shattered.
And the guilder collapsed.
It did. And right there, waiting in the wings, was the British pound, ready to become the new dominant reserve currency. A clear transition of power.
Fascinating. And the British story follows a similar arc later. Their decline was maybe slower?
Yeah, the pound held on to its reserve status for a surprisingly long time, even after Britain's relative power started waning in the late 1800s, with the U.S. and Germany rising fast.
But World War II really changed things.
Dramatically. Britain came out of the war victorious but absolutely drained. Huge debts, a costly empire to manage. Contrast that with the U.S., which was in an incredibly strong financial position.
So the pound started slipping.
It was a chronic decline, yeah. Big devaluations against the dollar, 30% in 1949, another 14% in 1967. And countries in the sterling area, like India, Australia, started getting nervous. They began asking for guarantees that their pound holdings could be converted to dollars.
A clear loss of faith, another sign of the changing world order.
Definitely. A signal that the transition was well underway.
Okay, that shift from the pound to the dollar really brings us to the American story, which is a cycle still playing out, right?
Very much so.
After World War II, the U.S. is the undisputed superpower. You mentioned 80% of the world's gold.
Yeah, immense wealth. Plus, producing roughly half the world's goods at that point, and the only ones with the atomic bomb initially.
So they basically got to shape the post-war world.
They did. They established the New World Order. You get the Bretton Woods monetary system, pegging currencies to the dollar, which was pegged to gold. You get the UN, the World Bank, the IMF, and the world splits into two camps. The U.S.-led capitalist, democratic bloc, and the Soviet-led communist, autocratic bloc.
And the period right after that, say 1950 to 1970.
Largely a time of peace and prosperity for the U.S. Debt grew, but it was mostly productive debt, financing businesses and innovation. The stock market developed strongly, and there were big national projects like the space race, the moon landing, that kind of united people.
A golden era, in a way. But prosperity can lead to getting ahead of ourselves. What did the excesses look like for the U.S.?
Well, you got the guns and butter thing we talked about, trying to fund the Vietnam War, and major social programs like the war on poverty simultaneously. That led to too much borrowing, too much debt creation.
And then the 1970s hit.
Yeah, the 70s were rough. High inflation, soaring interest rates, oil shocks, lots of strikes and labor disputes, political scandals like Watergate. There was a real sense the country was struggling, maybe even falling apart. What turned that around? A couple of big things. Paul Volcker becoming Fed chair in '79 and jacking up interest rates dramatically to crush inflation, even though it caused a deep recession. And then Ronald Reagan's election in 1980, bringing a shift towards conservatism, deregulation, tax cuts, aiming to restore discipline.
Okay, so a period of correction. Then we move into the 90s and 2000s. Globalization, the digital revolution.
Right, and huge geopolitical shifts. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, largely due to its economic failures.
Yeah.
Communism seemed discredited. Meanwhile, China, under Deng Xiaoping's reforms, started back in '78, was opening up. Then it joined the World Trade Organization in 2001.
And just exploded onto the global economic scene.
Absolutely. Became the workshop of the world, huge competitiveness, massive export surpluses, while the U.S. started running big trade deficits.
In this era of globalization and new technology, what was the impact inside countries like the U.S.?
This is key. While it created a lot of wealth overall, it also hollowed out a lot of traditional middle-class manufacturing jobs in developed countries. Technology automated some jobs, globalization outsourced others.
Leading to
A significant widening of the gaps, wealth gaps, opportunity gaps, not just between countries, but within them. And that feeds into the internal order-disorder cycle.
Right. So let's bring it to today. We talked about those 8 measures of power earlier. Where does the U.S. stand now based on this framework? It sounds like a mixed picture. Some strengths, but maybe some worrying trends.
That's a good way to put it. The U.S. is still incredibly strong in innovation and technology. It still has the world's leading reserve currency, the main financial centers, and the most powerful military. No question. But other measures have been declining relative to the past and relative to competitors. Things like education outcomes, overall competitiveness in producing goods, our share of world trade, our share of global production, these have been slipping for decades, some for nearly a century.
In China,
China is rising fast across many of these same metrics. The gap is closing, and in some areas, they might be pulling ahead. The pace of change is significant.
this brings us neatly to that internal cycle you mentioned, order to disorder. The study likens it to a disease, right? With stages and symptoms.
Yeah, it presents this 6-stage archetype, like a typical progression. Each stage kind of sets up the next one.
Walk us through them quickly.
Okay, stage 1. A new order begins. New leaders take charge, consolidate power after some conflict. Stage 2, they build the system's government, resource allocation, etc. If that's done well.
You get stage 3.
Stage 3, peace and prosperity. Things are working well. This is usually the high point.
But good times don't last forever. Stage 4.
Stage 4 is the period of excesses. The prosperity becomes a bit bubbly. Lots of debt-fueled spending, maybe less focus on productive investment. Military spending might increase. And crucially, those wealth and opportunity gaps get really wide.
Which leads to stage 5.
Stage 5, bad financial conditions and intense conflict. Debts become burdensome, divisions deepen, fighting intensifies. This is where the study suggests the U.S. is roughly now.
And the final stage, the low point.
Stage 6, civil wars or revolutions. The existing order breaks down completely. Then, out of that chaos, the cycle eventually restarts with stage 1 again.
Okay, let's drill down on stage 5 since that's where we apparently are. What are the telltale signs, the symptoms?
Okay, first big one, financial strain. For lots of people, companies, even governments, income just isn't keeping up with expenses. Debts and other IOUs are huge compared to assets.
So people might look okay on the surface, but they're stretched thin.
Exactly. The study calls it looking rich, but going broke. A perhaps good question for yourself, actually. What's your safety margin? How long could your savings last if your income dropped? How much risk are you carrying?
Sobering thoughts. What's next?
Decadence. You see a shift. More time and money spent on, let's say, less productive, more indulgent things. Super luxury goods, extravagant art, status symbols. While it might be legal, it often looks, well,
Obscene.
grotesque is the word the study uses, especially to those who are struggling, the have-nots. And that fuels resentment. Plus means capital isn't going into things that build future productivity.
Okay. And we already mentioned the widening wealth and opportunity gaps.
Yeah, a deep split between the haves and have-nots. Often there's just a lack of understanding or empathy across that divide. And you see structural problems, like how unequal school funding based on local property taxes can lock in disadvantage. It gets baked into the system.
This sounds like a recipe for instability.
It often is. And it leads directly to the next symptom, populism and extremism. You see leaders emerge, on both the left and the right, who appeal directly to the anger and frustration of ordinary people who feel left behind or ignored by the elites.
And their style is different.
Very confrontational. It's us versus them. Compromise is seen as weakness. Politics becomes incredibly polarized and tribal. Think about the U.S. now. Party line voting is overwhelming in Congress, and surveys show people have really negative, cold feelings towards members of the other party.
Intense division. What else?
A loss of truth in the public domain. It gets harder to agree on basic facts. Media becomes more sensationalized, more biased. Disinformation, politically motivated narratives spread easily, especially online. Trust in institutions, in the media, erodes. Free speech can actually suffer because people are afraid of being attacked or misrepresented.
Scary. And the final symptom?
Rule following fades. Basically, people start believing their cause, their side. Winning is more important than the rules, the game, the system itself.
So winning at any cost.
Yeah. Playing dirty becomes normalized. Passion overrides reason. The system for resolving differences peacefully comes under threat. You risk a kind of civil war within the existing structures. Reading through these, it does sound grim. Is there a point where it's just inevitable? Or can societies kind of pull back? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The model describes an archetype, a common path, but history also shows moments where societies did manage major shifts without total collapse. Think about FDR's New Deal during the Depression, or the Reagan Revolution you mentioned. Big changes within the system are possible, though often very turbulent.
Okay, let's shift from internal conflict to external. The U.S. and China. The study says the different clashes we see, trade war, tech war, etc., they're all connected, part of one big dynamic.
Exactly. They're not separate issues. They're facets of the same underlying great power competition.
Let's start with the economic war. History has warnings here, right? Like the 1930s.
Absolutely. Tariff wars, like Smoot-Hawley back then, often preceded actual military conflict. Today, we see both the U.S. and China trying to become less reliant on each other, bringing production home, decoupling.
What's the real danger zone here?
The most dangerous step would be cutting off truly essential imports. If China were to restrict rare earth minerals needed for technology, or if the U.S. were to block China from getting advanced semiconductors from places like Taiwan or cut off oil supplies, those would be major escalations.
And China is working hard to become independent technologically.
Yeah, the study suggests they aim for much greater self-sufficiency within, say, 5 to 10 years if current trends hold.
Which leads right into the technology war. You call this the most serious one.
Arguably, yes, because leadership in technology often determines who wins economically and militarily in the long run.
Where are the pressure points now?
Well, China still relies heavily on imported tech, especially those cutting-edge computer chips, many designed in the U.S. and manufactured in places like Taiwan. So the U.S. has significant leverage right now. The ability to restrict access to that technology is a powerful weapon.
Okay, then there's the geopolitical war, fighting for influence around the world.
Right. Both countries want influence, especially in their own neighborhoods and in places that provide essential resources or markets. China generally seems to want countries nearby to act almost like historical tributary states aligned with Beijing's interests.
And other countries are caught in the middle.
Big time. Many countries are really struggling with this choice. Align with the U.S., with its military power and alliances, or align with China, often the bigger economic partner. It's a tough balancing act. And interestingly, the study notes some global leaders see both Washington and Beijing as pretty ruthless in pursuing their goals.
Oh, then capital war. This is about money flows.
Exactly. For China, the big risk is getting cut off from international capital markets and the dollar system. For the U.S., the risk is the dollar losing its status as the world's primary reserve currency.
And the U.S. has tools here, sanctions.
A huge arsenal, yes. Because the dollar is so central to global finance, the U.S. can exert immense pressure by limiting access to it. But there's a vulnerability, too.
Which is?
The dollar's role in global transactions, maybe 55%, is much larger than the U.S. share of the global economy, around 20%. If the dollar were to significantly lose value, or if countries rapidly moved away from it, that could cause a massive financial shock for everyone holding dollar assets or debt. It could be devastating.
Finally, the culture war. This is about fundamental values.
Yeah, how people relate to each other, to the state. The study contrasts the sort of traditional Chinese model, more top-down, collective focus, emphasis on hierarchy, stability, obedience, meritocracy, with the traditional American model, more bottom-up, individual freedom, revolutionary spirit, questioning authority.
How do these deep differences matter in a conflict?
Well, while people everywhere share basic human desires, these core values, like individual liberty versus collective harmony, become really defining when systems are under pressure. Trying to impose one system on the other is seen as an existential threat, something to be fought against.
But these aren't totally fixed. Left versus right exists everywhere.
Exactly. Those left-right swings happen within countries over time. They're part of the cycle, not necessarily permanent cultural fixtures. Ultimately, the real test for any system isn't ideology. It's just, does it work? Is it delivering for its people? Is it adaptable?
Okay, so pulling all this together after this deep dive,
Right.
where does it leave us? You said the U.S. looks like it's about 75% through this typical cycle in that tough stage 5.
Based on the historical patterns and current indicators in the study, yeah. That stage of bad financial conditions and intensifying conflict, which historically often precedes major upheaval like revolution or civil war,
Doesn't sound great.
it highlights the challenges. But history also teaches resilience. Nothing lasts forever except change, evolution. These cycles are like tides. They come in, they go out. The key is knowing how to navigate the conditions you're in.
And how do you do that? Avoid conflict.
Well, power matters. When it's unclear who's really stronger, that's when fights are more likely. The study touches on the prisoner's dilemma idea. Sometimes the fear of mutual destruction can actually push sides towards finding ways to coexist. Sticking to rules, adapting, building some trust, even if it's grudging, becomes crucial.
And there's a warning about what happens after conflicts, too.
Yeah, an interesting point. Often, after a common enemy is defeated, the winners start fighting amongst themselves, that purge phase. Something to watch for in political dynamics when polarization is already high.
So what's the smartest path forward, according to this framework?
Ultimately, the best way to win is often to outcompete. To build your own strength, economic, social, educational, so you can negotiate from a position of power, not weakness. And interestingly, the study suggests generosity and building trust, aiming for win-win outcomes, are ultimately much more rewarding and sustainable than constant conflict and lose-lose scenarios.
Right. So thinking about everything we've covered, these huge cycles, the factors like education, debt, internal unity, willingness to compromise, what does this deep dive make you, our listener, think is the most critical element for a country's long-term strength? And knowing that, how does it shape your view of what might be ahead for the world and maybe even for your own decisions?